Good afternoon. It's Kathy Salisbury, the director of the Ambler Arboretum of Temple University. And as we still maintain our social distance and follow stay-at-home orders, the Arboretum remains closed. And so I'm taking this opportunity to do a little video about some plants you would find in the Arboretum, and you can probably find around your home and in your gardens as well, and tell you a little bit about them. And today I'm going to focus on poison ivy. And some of you may have already started itching, and I feel like if I had tried to offer a program called a poison ivy walk and talk at the Arboretum, it might not have been so popular. Probably not that many signups for that one. So I can offer this virtually and share what I think is interesting about these plants and how to tell them apart. And you all don't have to come close to interacting with poison ivy. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. So we're going to start with poison ivy. And so poison ivy is actually a native vine. In fact, I think that if I described it to you, you would think that if you're into native plants and gardening, it might be a plant that you would really consider having in your yard. So it is a native. It supports many species of birds. It's an important bird food source. It's also fed on by different mammals in our environment. It gets this great red fall color, white flowers that are followed by white berries. And so, I mean, that sounds pretty good, right? We are always looking for landscape plants and vines and native plants and good seasonal interest, and this plant has it all. What it also has is a chemical inside it that causes contact dermatitis in many of us. And I'm not trying to make light of the fact that people are allergic to this plant, and in fact, in some cases, severely allergic. And that is definitely a problem. And so we want to think very carefully about where we let this plant stay and where we can let it grow, understanding that it is part of our native ecosystem. In our area, this is part of the plant community, so it helps support the wildlife in this area, whether we like it or not, and whether it makes us itch or not. In fact, did you know that they've found that only primates and hamsters get poison ivy? Isn't that strange? So deer actually munch on poison ivy, and other herbivores do as well, and they don't have the problems with it. And it is true that we cannot get this when we're younger. We cannot be affected by it. And then when we're older, we can start getting rashes from it. And everybody has different experiences and different reactions to poison ivy. But the fact remains that this is a native vine, and it's part of our ecosystem and part of our plant community. So I learned a rhyme when I was younger that helped me to identify poison ivy. And so it starts off with what some of you may be familiar with, which is leaves of 3, let it be, right? And so here we see poison ivy has compound leaves. So what you're seeing here are leaflets, and then each one of those is made up of 3 leaves. And one of the ways to tell poison ivy apart from other plants that have 3 leaves is that we can see that this middle leaflet here has a long, what's called a petiole, a stem on the leaflet. And so that's one way to tell it apart. When it's young, we can also see that they're shiny. And here we can even see that the leaves emerge red in color. And so we have shiny leaves, leaves that are red, and leaves that are in 3 that are all a good hint that this is poison ivy. So leaves of 3, let it be. And then the next part of the rhyme is hairy rope, don't be a dope. And so here is the vine structure of poison ivy, and you can see here all of these fine hairs on it. These are aerial rootlets, and these help the plant adhere to a supporting structure, whether that is a rock, a tree, your house, something like that. So you can see that all of these fine hairs really help you to identify poison ivy. You can see it goes all the way up this tree. And All parts of poison ivy plants have that toxin in it that can cause contact dermatitis. So you really want to be sure, and they can happen at any season. So you really want to be sure that if you know that you are one of the people who struggles with getting rashes from poison ivy, that you understand what all parts of the plant look like and you avoid them. Nothing like tree hugging and finding out that you've just also hugged a giant strand of hairy poison ivy. And so leaves of 3, let it be, hairy rope, don't be a dope, and then berries of white, run in fright. So what people don't realize, I think they miss a lot of on poison ivy, especially when it's growing upwards on trees and elevated and it's older plants. Poison ivy gets flowers, which are followed by white fruits. So kind of a white-green flower, which are followed by white fruits in the fall, which birds like woodpeckers and cedar waxwings actually really love to eat. And that's one of the ways that poison ivy spreads. Here we can see underneath the leaves are flower buds. And the flower buds are getting ready to open. So they're kind of a late spring, early summer flowering plant. And they will open up. And you know what? Bees travel to these plants and take the nectar and the pollen from them. And so they're useful as pollinator plants. And also a number of moth species feed on these. And so this plant not only supports birds and mammals, but insect populations and pollinators as well. So that's poison ivy. So it climbs by these modified aerial roots here. So you can see here, they're just kind of straight out from the stem. So leaves of 3, let it be. Berries of white, run in fright. Hairy rope, don't be a dope. 3 leaflets that can be shiny red when they're emerging in the spring, but then turn mostly green throughout the summer. Okay, so that's poison ivy. Remember, native plant important for wildlife. The next plant I'm going to show you as I walk down the road here, because that's where that good example of poison ivy is growing. The next plant I'm going to show you is called Virginia creeper. And Virginia creeper sometimes is referred to as an invasive plant by people. And invasive plant, remember, means that the plant is causing harm to human health, harm to the environment, or economic harm, and is exotic to the ecosystem in question. And in the case of Virginia creeper, this is not exotic to the ecosystem in question. This is a native plant. It belongs here just like poison ivy does. It's part of our ecosystem. And so when you look at Virginia creeper here, you see that it is also a vine, but you will not see the hairs along the vine. And you can see here that it's 5 leaflets. So this is also a compound leaf, but these are leaflets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 palmately compound leaflets. And so that's different than poison ivy, although they both can emerge with a reddish tinge to them. You can see these here have sort of a reddish tinge, and these were even more red last week when they were younger. But here there are 5 leaflets. And then the way that these climb here is they send out these tiny tendrils. Their tendrils are their method of climbing, and the tendrils have suction cups at the end of them. Let's see if we can focus in here on a suction cup. And so the suction cup is what keeps the plant in place. So here you can see this is climbing over a boulder. When I pull these up, they're attached by these suction cups. It's not letting them go. And so that is much different than what poison ivy looks like. Poison ivy doesn't have suction cups. The means of attachment look much more like hairs than looks like suction cups. And these are kind of twining like you would imagine a vine to do. And then they're attached that way. So there's no hairs or hairy look to the vine here. So Virginia creeper can crawl all over the place. Here you can see it. It's all over this boulder. But it is also part of our ecosystem. It also supports a wide variety of bird species. So this blooms, not very showy flowers. It blooms later in the summer, and then it's followed by these blue berries in the fall. And those berries are very important food sources for migrating birds and our residential birds that don't migrate, that just sort of hang around throughout the year. And so even though this plant can be annoying to us and it's growing in places that we might not want it to grow, or up plants that we don't want it to grow up, we want to make sure that we remember that these plants are part of our plant communities. They're part of our ecosystem. And so they're important and they serve a purpose. And so when we're thinking about managing our landscapes and where we're going to plant things and what we're going to plant and what we're going to remove, we want to make sure that we understand the ecological significance of the plants that we're making decisions about. And so, if a poison ivy plant is growing up a tree that is outside of, along the road like the one I showed you, and it's not really where people walk or people play or anything like that, maybe we leave it for the birds. But if it's growing up in your garden beds that you are actively gardening all the time, or playgrounds and play areas, then you might consider managing it. And there's a number of different ways to manage it that you can learn about online. But that's the way to tell them apart, and that those are two plants that some people consider annoying but are actually very beneficial in the ecosystem. So I thank you very much for joining me today for this mini walk and talk about poison ivy and Virginia creeper. And once again, we cannot wait to see you in the gardens, to show you these plants in person, maybe not so up close and personal in this case, and welcome you back to all the other walks and talks and programs that we have planned for whenever we're able to see you again. Take good care of yourselves and see you soon.